Age of Mythology Retold is releasing in just a couple of months' time, and if you're watching this video in the couple of days after its release, there's actually an open beta happening this weekend. You don't need to pre-order it, and anyone can play it. There's a link in the description. For this previous beta, you did need to pre-order the somewhat cringe premium edition to get access, and thankfully for you, I did, so you don't have to. This video is sponsored by Gravity. Whoa! No, not that kind. This Gravity is a games publisher focused on uncovering promising indie titles and finding their mark on PC and console. And there's a few notable ones that they've got upcoming in the pipeline. There's Alt F42, or is it Alt F42? Regardless, it's the sequel to Alt F4, which you may remember your favourite family-friendly streamer losing their mind over a few years back. It was one of the more successful descendant of the Bennett Foddy lineage, and Alt F42 is out on Steam now. Another is Pig Romance, a grim side-scrolling fairy tale adventure game about pigs in a sausage factory. Hey, can't fault it for its creativity, I guess. This one has a free demo and it's currently in early access. And finally, there's Little Gods of the Abyss, a story-driven action-adventure game with an eye-catching aesthetic and art style. Like the previous game, this one is also in early access now. There are links to all three games in the description if you'd like to check them out and support the channel. So thanks again to Gravity for sponsoring the video, and now let's get back to Age of Mythology. I've played the tutorial, all 5 available campaign missions, quite a few skirmish games, and all 3 available factions. The Atlanteans aren't in this beta, and there's been no mention about the Chinese from Tales of the Dragon at all, except for this little footnote that there will be a new Chinese pantheon for the first of the 2 planned expansions. If you want to hear my thoughts on that, and the whole advanced access scheme and pre-order exclusive faction, which are some of the most brazen that I've seen in a while, then stick around to the last section of this video. This is my first time playing AOM Retold, and aside from that first gameplay trailer, I hadn't really seen anything about it before playing this build. So I was very intrigued to see how they'd put Age of Mythology into our modern era, while maintaining its charm and visual style, as they did with Age 2 and Age 3 Definitive Edition. Also, I apologise for this huge floating icon that identifies my footage. Usually this is reserved for builds covered under an NDA to make it harder for leaks to get out, but this build was publicly available and not under any such agreement. So yeah, sorry, you'll get used to it, I guess. And yeah, all this footage is from the previous beta, not the early build that's going to be available to everyone this weekend. And, well, like its historical counterparts, the ways they've brought Age of Mythology into current year is by increasing the fidelity of every single aspect of the game, while keeping new assets and effects in line with what is available in the original. That's except for one particular thing, which I'll get to soon. But on the pure visuals front, I think AOM Retold looks really great. Everything is super crisp, the art style is fantastic, and there's a lot of detail that simply didn't exist before. Terrain is a huge standout for me, and it reminds me of the uplift found in Age of Empires 3 Definitive, which makes sense considering these are running on the same engine, and that they're both 3D games from roughly the same era. That more significant change I mentioned is the UI overhaul from the original game to this new version. It takes quite a bit of inspiration from what's in Age of Empires 4 actually, with this golden, shiny style taking hold in the menus and icons from corner to corner. And honestly, I kinda like it. It fits the magical, godly vibe that Age of Mythology has always gone for, and it still manages to feel familiar despite being quite different to the original. Despite the praise though, I did absolutely run into some issues on the visual front. I'm pretty confident I can chalk these up to it just being an incomplete beta build, but it's worth chronicling them here in this video to ensure that they aren't present in the final build. First is some pretty significant texture pop-in, most noticeable when you click around the minimap to a totally different location than the one you were just in. This is the most significant problem I had, and it needs to be tightened up for release, because it's very obvious and even more annoying. The next were some visual glitches, like here when this bird just seems to fly under a building that's being constructed, and some pretty not great looking shadows in campaign cutscenes. Lastly, there was the performance, which for me was just okay at best, and pretty gnarly at worst. Again, I'm sure this will be tidied up, but it's something I've got my eye on, as what was on display in this build is not really inspiring. The game is just a month or so from being released, and that's not a lot of time to get stuff like this sorted. I like to think that this build was maybe a bit old and not super recent, but hey, time will tell. I guess we can see how much of a difference there is in the stress test this weekend. At this point, I've spent hundreds of hours across the Age of Empires series, particularly Age 2 Definitive in the past couple of years. But I'll admit, Age of Mythology was never my favourite game growing up, and clearly it still wasn't when the Extended Edition launched back in 2014. I didn't hate it or anything, I just much preferred its historical predecessor. Though like a lot of RTSs of the era, I did still play my fair share. So I'm coming at AOM Retold from more of an Age of Empires perspective, and how it compares specifically with Age 2 Definitive. Not so much about how much or how little it's changed from the original Age of Mythology. So with that being said, I'm pretty impressed here. It was incredibly simple to drop in and start playing, likely because the core of the game is so much like Age of Empires. For the uninitiated, you can expect resource gathering, advancing through ages, and building your bases to be more or less the same as its historical counterpart, and despite it looking more like Age 3, it functions probably closer to Age 2, with its own unique flavour on top. The main differentiator is obviously its mythological setting. Civilizations have a choice of multiple gods you can worship, and each one grants a unique set of god powers to use throughout the game. And this is actually where one of the most significant changes to the game is found, because god powers can now be used multiple times throughout a game via a recharge timer, whereas before they were only single use. There is a bunch of smaller changes too, some mechanical and some quality of life. There are new systems to auto-assign villagers to simplify base management, there's hotkey displays on icons, there's an increased population limit, among others. The first few missions of the campaign that are available here do give a taste of what's going to be playable on launch, but it's obviously not enough to give a definitive sense on its final quality. I don't suspect there will be much difference between this and the original outside the visuals, although I am interested to see how the mechanical changes that Retold brings affect the gameplay, because I'm sure there are some missions that needed retooling now that god powers can now be used more than once. Presentation wise, not much has changed either. It obviously looks better, but the style of the characters talking to each other while standing around is, yeah, well, it's just that. It's a product of its time and there's nothing inherently wrong with it by any means, just don't expect a Warcraft 3 Reforged level of cinematics and presentation overhauls. Psych! All that does mean that AOM Retold retains the vibes and atmosphere of the original exceptionally well, and I reckon you'll feel right at home here, whether you're reliving the campaign as you may have 20 years ago, or are just playing skirmish with your mates against the AI. Right, now that we've got the impressions out of the way, I want to talk a bit about everyone's favourite topic. Morally questionable business practices, woohoo! And in AOM Retold, it all surrounds the existence of this premium edition that I unfortunately bought because this is like my job or something. Now look, generally speaking, I don't have a problem with deluxe editions, premium editions, gold editions, whatever you want to call them. Usually they would come with a digital soundtrack, maybe some exclusive cosmetics, perhaps even a cool physical piece of memorabilia to put on your shelf to accentuate and convey your super cool and unique personality. But publishers have always been seeking superior and more convincing ways to get people to pony up for these pricier versions, because the profit margins are significantly higher, especially for all these digital-only releases we're getting nowadays. I mean, they've made the soundtrack already, and the cosmetics are going to be sold as a microtransaction later, once the exclusivity is passed. So just give it a bit of marketing, and boom! You're now making nearly double the money for basically no more work. So it makes sense then that the benefits of these editions have become more and more brazen over the years, and AOM Retold is one of the worst I've seen. Because not only does it include an entire week of advanced access, a trend that's become very popular over the last while because it requires no extra time or money to achieve, it also includes exclusive gameplay content. Not cosmetics, actual content, that while we don't know what it is specifically yet, could provide an in-game advantage over those who don't have access to it. I know that's a worst case scenario, but it's possible, and hey, it's been done before. Personally speaking, I don't think one Norse god is likely to upset the game balance and provide a tangible benefit to players with deeper pockets, but there's also just the fact that we have no idea what's actually included here, and you're just expected to pay up, sight unseen, and get what you're given on release. The same goes for the two expansions. I mean, value-wise, it probably makes the price of the premium edition worth it if you were absolutely 100% going to buy them already. But again, it's sight unseen. Microsoft are asking for your money for a digital product with no chance of scarcity, and no information on what you're really buying. And then obviously not the first to do this, but I believe they are the first in creating such a long early access period, in this case an entire week before release. I am glad that Steam has added a dedicated tag to this and clearly states that user reviews will be active from the second the advanced access goes live, so at the very least you can wait until some reviews come in and then make up your mind. But remember, this is for the premium edition only. Regular buyers need to wait until the official release of September the 4th. I don't really have any hard-hitting conclusions or solutions to this, other than just speaking out against practices that I don't think are beneficial to the consumer, and for us to use the only language that they really understand: money. I debated not making this video because it does seem a touch hypocritical to say don't pre-order expensive versions, and then pre-order the expensive version for a YouTube video, but I feel like the service and entertainment this video provides is probably worth it. I don't know, let me know in the comments what you think, if you've got any thoughts. But back to the game itself, I think Age of Mythology Retold is in a good spot to be a hit when it launches next month. Visually it looks great, and the gameplay is as good as you remember, with some changes and improvements, and the promise of further expansions finally giving this 2-decade-old game some new tricks. And no, I don't count that terrible expansion for the extended edition. I do wish it had launched with a new faction or a set of campaigns, elevating it to more than just a remake, as Age of Empires 2 Definitive did back in 2019, but considering Retold is bringing a significant top-to-bottom visual overhaul, numerous gameplay changes like how god powers function, and the brand new Wonder Age, as well as a new UI, remastered soundtrack, mechanical additions, and a simultaneous debut on console, I reckon it'll prove to be a unique enough product to justify its existence. And thanks again to Gravity for sponsoring this video. There are links in the description if you want to check out their games. Hey, thanks so much for watching, and if you'd like to support me in what I do here, you can do so via Patreon or YouTube memberships. Thanks to Takayo, Bad Ghosts, Sean, Greyspirit4, George, King Thickums, Pavel, Bram, Christian, Dan, Orion, Disrufkin, and Cameron, and my paladins, Johnny, Marika, Age of Course, Joe, Tank, and Empyrean. Thanks again very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.